All righty, here we go. What's going on, everybody? It's Jason Myrtetus, Monday edition of Parx Sportsbook presents Stick to Hockey Live. Make a little iced tea, a little half and half. Always good stuff. For a while there, it wasn't in stock, but I guess the supply chain issues are resolving, and now we can get our Wawa diet half and half again. Good stuff. Parx Sportsbook presents Stick to Hockey Live, and we got an interesting episode today. Let me tell you about Parx before we get to our guest on the episode, NHL Rumors Daily, which is going to be fascinating as we're starting to see the market begin to set itself in the NHL. But let me tell you about Parx Sportsbook because it was a huge sports gambling weekend. Of course, the big game yesterday, still lots of great stuff to get in on. You can get in on the hockey action, college and pro hoops, Olympics, maybe baseball at some point. Who knows? We'll see. It's a bit of a mess there, obviously, and much more. And you got to get it in the action with Parx Sportsbook because it's so simple to use. You don't need to be a savant on your phone or with apps or anything like that. Just go to the App Store on either your Android or your Apple phone, download the Parx Sportsbook app, open up an account, and it's simple. Deposit, first bet, risk-free, up to $500. You won't find a better deal. No promo code. Just download the app. Again, open an account, deposit, and you are good to go. And you get that $500 risk-free bet. And check out all the different things you can bet. In-game betting, live play-by-play betting, same-game parlays, player performances, exact score, first to score, to score, over-unders on point totals. You name it. It is all there in all the sports. You can do it on hoops. That's always fun. On hockey, that's always fun. You got to find those matchups, though. You got to find those good matchups. That's why you listen to Tone's Takes on Thursdays on our edition with him. He gives you great plays, not just straight up plays either. Money line, puck, you name it. It's all there for you. So, again, get that risk-free bet up to $500 just for opening an account, deposit, and you're good to go. So download the app, check it out. And also follow Parx Sportsbook on all the different social channels, at Parx Sportsbook on Twitter, on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube as well. You'll get great content there with myself and the Stick to Hockey Live show, of course. And then also the Odds podcast, which will be tomorrow with Harry Mays. And then also Natalie Eganoff, Sam Wilson, Rich Gannon, Matt Alba, you name it. Eddie Alvarez, just an awesome roster of talent. And we're providing great content, and we hope you guys are enjoying it. So make sure you get on those social channels as well, at Parx Sportsbook on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook as well. And on this episode today, I think it's going to be interesting because we're about 5 weeks away. What is it? Today's February 14th. Happy Valentine's Day. And March 21st is the NHL Trade Deadline, which is 5 weeks from today. And we're starting to see the market begin to set itself already. There's rumors out there and reports that Tyler Toffoli is going to be moved. He's got 3 or 2 years beyond this year left on his contract. I think at $4.5 million, I want to say. No, 4.25 for Tyler Toffoli. There's obviously the market needs to set itself, and there's obviously some big names out there. Jacob Chychrun, who's got 3 years term left. Ben Sherratt, Marc-Andre Fleury is a name that's been thrown around, and including with the Washington Capitals. Obviously, one of the big ones, a local guy, that would be Claude Giroux. He's going to be a UFA, $8.275 million cap hit. Klingberg, Hurdle is an unrestricted free agent after this year if he doesn't up in San Jose. So tons of players. JT Miller, a point per game player. Phil Kessel, who's been mired now in Arizona and still has something left to give. So let's bring him on right now. You have his Twitter handle at NHL Rumors Daily. Does great stuff and always interesting. And he joins us right now on Parx Sportsbook presents Stick to Hockey Live. What do I call you? Do I call you NRD?
NRD works for me, man. I appreciate you having me on. This is long overdue, Jason.
Yeah, man. How you been? Everything good?
Everything is good. Holding it down in the rumor cave, as I like to call it. It's exciting times. I mean, we just had a big move today with Tyler Toffoli going to the Calgary Flames.
Is that done now?
The trade call has not been placed yet, but according to Elliott, the entire package is built out. So it's a first, a fifth, a prospect, and Tyler Pitlick.
Yeah. Boy, Pitlick goes, now I'm going to Montreal for this.
Yeah.
Off season started.
Yeah.
It's one of
Yep.
those things. You always got to look at the guy going the other way that's going to the team that's selling, because the team that's selling, it may be an opportunity for some guys, but other guys, like a role player like Pitlick, it's like, damn, man, I had something to contribute here and I could have been a piece, maybe not the most important. And you understand it because Toffoli's a good player. But what does this do, NRD, for the market? Does this begin to set the market on what the price is going to be, at least for a guy with a little bit of term left with Toffoli?
Yeah, and if you look at the market as it is right now, I mean, this is by far and away the first major, minor, whatever you want to call it, intermediate trade that we've had. I mean, we've had some, future consideration stuff happen earlier on in the season with COVID, but this is the first big trade we've had. And I think it's interesting because if you look at this package, you can, not to discredit Pitlick or the prospect or anything like that, but the fifth, the prospect Pitlick, that's all kind of fluff. I mean, we're really talking about a first for Tyler Toffoli, right?
Yeah.
And that's a guy under term. I don't know if that's uh I don't know if that trying to put this in the right words here. I don't know
Comparable.
if yeah, terrible. I don't know if it invigorates teams that, the team that we love talking about here on this show, the Flyers, that have rentals in play. I don't know if you're happy about a guy like Toffoli who can provide to the Calgary Flames, and the Calgary Flames are a team that was on the rental market, and they got a guy under contract like Toffoli only for a first. Really, when you look at it that way, I don't know how great you feel about the market after seeing a deal like that. Granted, Montreal's selling, and they're just trying to collect assets from whoever is willing to give them. But as a whole, I don't know how great you feel about the market after seeing a deal like that. You would like to think that a guy under term that can provide top six scoring, and Tyler Toffoli goes for a little bit more than that.
A guy who had a lot of success in LA as a playoff performer as well. The one thing about it is this pick, the first round pick, top 10 protected? Is that what I'm saying?
Yeah, the belief is it is top 10 protected. Not that I think Calgary is going to end up in the top 10 in the draft anytime soon, but
Yeah.
if in case they are, yes, it is protected.
Boy, Montreal would hope so, because they would end up in the top 10 because they get a pick in the 2023 draft then. Their
Yeah,
pick would be unprotected, which is looking like a stout draft class. It's, as it's being called here already, not even had the 2022 draft class yet. When you look at it too, is the reason, value goes up with urgency and a deadline, and teams get desperate and they start to think they're going to miss out on something. So the value tends to grow as you get closer to the deadline. Is this more, in your opinion, when you look at the value that you got, and you said it, it's not, a huge value there, but is that because we're 5 weeks away from the deadline? Is that part of it? And they wanted to get him in a little earlier?
I normally, so now it's interesting when you make that point because you would think, I mean, logic would say that if you're a team like Calgary that wants to bring in a guy like that a little bit earlier and get the jump, there'd be a premium to pay for that.
Yeah.
And it's interesting in this case that there really wasn't. We have seen in years past. I mean, you look at one team I always like to, use as an example when we talk about sell-offs, right, is the New York Rangers of 2018, 2019.
Yeah.
And Jeff Gordon, who's now GM of Montreal, who completed this deal. He did a lot of his work selling off before the deadline and before the week leading up to the deadline. And it worked out for the Rangers in the sense that they brought back a ton of assets in those moves to get those players acclimated in their new locations and for other teams to get the jump on the deadline kind of fever that happens that leading up to the deadline day. In this case, we didn't see it. Normally, I would agree with to the point that there should be a premium to pay, especially when you're talking about a player like Toffoli's caliber or, Giroux or JT Miller that potentially available. If you're a team that wants to step up and make a deal before the deadline and not ruin, but diminish the chances of a bidding war for the selling team, I would think that there's a premium to pay for sure.
Yeah, and the other part of it too is you get that player in earlier so they can assimilate and integrate, because there's not a lot of season left when at deadline day, and that gives the team a jump and can help solidify their position as well to get that, added boost into their lineup. And then the other part too is, with a guy like Toffoli who comes in with playoff success and everything, and he comes into this situation, Calgary looking to really make some noise. They had a great start to the season. Was there noise around Toffoli?
There was noise around Toffoli once Montreal kind of bottomed out. The writing was on the wall
That
for
was
Montreal.
opening night, by the way.
Yeah, well, as soon as they awarded Tampa Bay the Stanley Cup last year, Montreal hit rock bottom. But yeah, no, the writing was on the wall for Montreal to sell off. Now, normally when you think of terms of sell off, you think of selling off guys that are on expiring contracts. But if you look at the window that Montreal now is starting on their rebuild to compete again, maybe 4 or 5 years from now to where they want to be, it just doesn't mesh with Toffoli's contract or the career path that he's on at this point. So the writing was on the wall for Toffoli to be in play. I know Elliott and some others mentioned that LA, possibly a return there, was a fit for Toffoli, but Calgary was hot for him. Calgary has a lot of they have a lot of things up in the air, a lot of irons on the fire right now, and because they were able to send Pitlick back the other way and acquire Toffoli without retaining any space, they do have flexibility to make other moves, namely at the center position. If they send Monahan the other way, they can upgrade on defense. Calgary has a lot of flexibility heading into deadline day, despite kind of going money in, money out right now in this Toffoli deal.
Yeah, it's interesting. Sherrod's another guy. I mean, I don't know what the future is going to be for Carey Price, and there's obviously a lot of variables there. We saw what he did in those playoffs last year, leading the Canadians to the finals. Let's get to the local guy because there's a lot of noise around Claude Giroux, and it seems like NRD that it's a fait accompli in a lot of ways that Colorado is the destination. We know Danny Briere was out there this week scouting, and they've been really looking at their AHL team and obviously the big club as well. And I say that's all well and good. That may be a team where he ends up going until it's not. What's the latest on Claude Giroux?
The latest on Claude Giroux, and you really touched on it. Everybody's talking about Colorado right now as the main suitor. There are other teams in play here. This is not to say that Claude Giroux, went to his representation and went to the Flyers organization and said, "I only want to be in Colorado." But there are a ton of connections there with Nathan McKinnon, a lot of familiarity with him and the type of hockey that Colorado plays and the role that he would probably fit into that lineup in somewhere on the second or third line. But I really do think that Colorado's the hot name and for right reasons. There are a bunch of names being thrown around by Flyers fans. I'm not here to come on, a Flyers fanatic show and then kind of throw cold water on guys like Alex Newhook, but it's just not likely at this point from my knowledge and from what I know. You're looking more so at the Yost, at the Barron, at the Hellison range of names that could potentially be in play here for the Giroux deal. That's on the high end. But Colorado seems to be the flavor of the minute, flavor of the hour right now for Claude Giroux. And I'm interested to see. We just got done talking about how there's a premium to pay, if you want to get a guy in the building a little bit earlier ahead of the deadline. I wonder if right now Colorado's not stepped up to what Philadelphia's looking for. But I do wonder if things start to change and more deals like this Toffoli trade goes down. I do wonder if Colorado gets a little bit more serious in their pursuit and really steps up and tries to get this done ahead of deadline season.
You get a sense out of Colorado that they're a team that knows that they need to really make a huge progressive step this year. I mean, they've got great players. You look at McKinnon, you look at McCarr, obviously, and Landeskog and Rantanen. I mean, they're a really good team. Are they at the point now where because Joe Sakic has always been a very patient general manager and waits for the right deal. I mean, we saw it when he dealt Ryan O'Reilly and other players. But you look at it, are they a team right now that is going, all right, our window's here. We have to mortgage something to try and go for it this season because they're that good and they have that good of a chance?
I think you have to more so than ever, especially
Yeah.
now. Each year, Colorado seems to add another guy to the pool, whether it's via the draft or free agency or, via their prospect pool through the draft that just steps up and plays, an elite role in that roster. And in the past couple of years, that's been Cale Makar. And now you have to pay Cale Makar at some point. Adam Fox just re-signed with the New York Rangers, probably the most comparable contract to what Makar is going to get.
Yeah, 9 mil.
And that window, I mean, when you have a guy like that, you have to compete while he's on a short term and cheap deal. And that's why I think there's a lot of talk, like you mentioned. Joe Sakic's not necessarily the GM that likes to go all in and put his chips on the table. But I think more so than ever, this is your year because of the culmination of the talent that you have. A player like Claude Giroux being available, who is a seamless fit inside the locker room with a lot of the players he knows there. A guy like Cale Makar on a cheap contract. Jared Bednar starting to coach that team a little bit. You're getting more effort out of Colorado. I think that's something that's sorely lacked. That's a lot of the second round exit jokes from the Colorado Avalanche in years past is the effort that they put on, especially in the postseason. I think those claims are dispelled now that Jared Bednar has really gotten to that team in that locker room. And yeah, I think now's an opportunity to go for it. I think the only thing, if you're Colorado, that you're missing, especially after a Claude Giroux deal, is just the goaltending. I just think that you have to be really confident that the goaltenders that you have in Pavel Francois in place is the guy to bring you to the cup. And I'm not sure if that's something that I don't know if I believe in that. I'll just put it that way.
Yeah, and we know the importance of the position in the playoffs. I mean, it's a different game. You're not going to just run and gun and outscore teams in the playoffs. Teams that are built that way haven't had to look at Toronto. I mean, they can beat you 6-3 in the regular season every night. They get into the playoffs and those where every inch of the ice of the 200 by 85 is contested. and it's a different ball game. Now they're better defensively this year, and Jack Campbell's been good. But yeah, I have that question mark as well. Is it one or the other for them? Is it upgrade a goaltender or a player of the magnitude of Giroux?
So to my knowledge, so Chris Johnson on Insider Trading up in TSN, great guy. He mentioned the other day that it is one or the other. I've been crunching. I'm like everybody else. I sit there on Cap Friendly. I have fun crunching numbers and whatnot. Both to some degree, and then both alluding to Marc-Andre Fleury, obviously, if he's their top goaltending target. It is possible. It really just depends on the flexibility and what the Philadelphia Flyers do leading up to the Claude Giroux deal, and whether they have the space to retain half that contract, or whether there's a third-party broker involved, because we've seen trades like that in years past where a team like an Arizona or a Buffalo get involved and broker another level of retainment to the contract. So it is one or the other if this is going to be a straight up deal for Colorado and Philadelphia, or Colorado and a team with a goaltender. But if there are other things in play or other dominoes to fall, then I do believe that Colorado has a shot at pulling off both things.
Wow. Yeah, they may have to unload a player in that case, a rostered player. Would Sam Gerard be a guy that they'd be willing to part with?
Sam Gerard's an extremely interesting case because we've been talking about his name in the rumor mill for a better part of 3 or 4 years now.
Yeah.
I think since he ended up in Colorado from the Matt Duchene deal, Sam Gerard has been in the rumor mill. If you're Colorado, right, and this is so a podcast with Brett Merriman, Cold Stove Podcast. Sorry for the shameless plug, but I have to say it. And we discussed this last week that, Sam Gerard is one of those players that if you're Colorado and he's been in the rumor mill, and there are teams that are going to be interested in him, especially because of the way he plays the defense. He's a puck-moving defenseman. A lot of teams are going to miss out on Jacob Chikrin. They're going to turn to some other puck-moving defensemen that are on the market. But if you're Colorado and you know that this is your year, I don't foresee a world where if you're Joe Sakic, you want to move him. Unless, of course, the supplemental moves that come in play, a Marc-Andre Fleury, a Claude Giroux, you clear up enough space that, hey, listen, Sam Gerard is expendable in our chase for a Stanley Cup. But if you're not going to be able to get both done, I don't know why you'd give up somebody who flies under the radar a little bit in terms of how much we talk about Sam Gerard, but he moves the puck really well, and I think he's a decent asset to have in that blue line, especially come playoff time.
Yeah, I mean, he's only 23 too, and he's got years left on his deal. I mean, he's only in year 2 of a 7-year deal. So he's tied up all the way through 26, 27 at a pretty manageable cap hit too at $5 million. They're not going to eat any money. It's rare for teams, right, NRD, that when they're in the rental market to grab a guy to make a push, that they're going to take something off their roster to do it. Now, we saw Pitlick go in the Toffoli deal, but that's a little bit different, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very different, and you hit the nail on the head. It's very rare to see a team, give up assets. I know you have to spend to get, you have to give to get in this world, but if you're a team like Colorado and you really have a great shot at the Stanley Cup at the end of the year, and you're Joe Sakic, who's an extremely shrewd GM, and he's extremely stubborn to work on a deal with, he's not going to be willing to give up assets unless, like I mentioned, unless there's a scenario where he could bring in a couple more pieces that round out the roster a little bit better. Then that's a world where maybe like a Sam Gerard gets in play. But other than that, no, it's extremely rare. It just doesn't happen like it used to, especially in the 90s. You saw that more in the 90s.
Oh, yeah. And the other thing, too, is no salary cap in the 90s. But the other thing is those deals are complicated. You need a lot of dominoes to fall. That's hard to do right now.
Yeah, especially with, we're hopefully out of the water from COVID, but you never know what happens, and taxi squads are not in play anymore. But you need the depth in the organization, not only with the big club now. And it's just hard to bleed into the names that you have on the roster, especially when there's still a little bit of uncertainty. Hopefully, fingers crossed, we're coming out of this and everything looks great for the playoffs as it does right now. But it's in the back of every GM's mind right now, that flexibility with their roster, their cap figure, and what doomsday scenario they potentially need in place to kind of navigate if we had to go back into that scenario.
All right. If not Colorado for Giroux, NRD, who else is in the mix here? Who could you see that nobody's being reported as heavily as Colorado and Giroux, but who else could be in this mix for Giroux? Do you look at a team like Florida? Do you look at a team like Minnesota? Maybe LA? I mean, where else do you look here? I know Boston's been mentioned at times as well. Who else fits the bill and maybe in the equation?
I think all the teams you mentioned fit the bill. If you're talking Claude Giroux trade, you could even throw Carolina and the New York Rangers into that mix. From what I know, and there's been a lot of speculation about the Rangers and Giroux. From what I know, though, I'm not sure that Chris Drury and the New York Rangers are willing to pay the in-division tax for Claude Giroux at this point. Maybe that changes, but I think that's a little high for what they're looking to do. But Carolina makes a ton of sense. I know they're in division. It's a little different though when you're talking about the Flyers and the Rangers rivalry, and then
Yeah.
Carolina. But Carolina's looking for an upgrade. You mentioned the Minnesota Wild. The interesting thing about the Minnesota Wild is that they don't necessarily have the cap flexibility to pull things off like the Colorado Avalanche do. So there would be a contract probably going out or the other way. A lot of speculation about Kevin Fiala's name potentially being available. He's the type. I love Kevin Fiala. I love the way he plays the game. He plays it quick. He plays it fast. But at the same time, if you want to upgrade at the center position, bring in Claude Giroux and stick him with Kirill Kaprizov, man, what a line would that be? But you have to move some money out. And Kevin Fiala, just an interesting name. I'm not sure. It's a little bit more speculative right now. And I know I'm NHL Rumors Daily and not NHL Speculations Daily, but if you're looking at cap friendly and you're looking at the hit and you're looking at the numbers, there's maneuvers to be made if Minnesota were to get involved in Claude Giroux. But all the names you mentioned make a ton of sense. You look at St. Louis potentially if they want to make a move. I've heard they're willing to stand pat and just kind of let the season play out with the roster that they have. LA, Boston, yeah, all great names. And Claude Giroux, why wouldn't 28 teams line up to acquire a guy that has been a proven leader for 15 years in an organization, loyal as can be, continues to play extremely well. I think he's having one of his best seasons of his career this year in what some would say is a lost season for Philadelphia. And, that's going to garner a ton of interest from around the league, whether they're contenders or pretenders or teams that Claude Giroux is willing to wait for. That's what we're all kind of here to find out, but ton of interest in a guy like him.
What's the deal with Chikrin? I mean, because I look at him and, you got a big left shot defenseman under contract for 3 more years beyond at 4.6. Arizona's a bit of a mess as always. I can't even believe the league would let them trade him in some ways. But what's he going to garner? Because there's a lot of teams in the mix. I mean, part of my 5-point plan for the Flyers is that the word is they need to get high end talent. That's what the word that Chuck Fletcher used, the phrase, and Danny Briere used it as well. And to get high end talent, you're going to have to give up something. So my thing, NRD, was this. Here's my speculation as my rumor career begins. I said that Montreal or Toronto gets bounced in the first round again. They got to do something there. They have 2 high-end talent forwards. Well, they have more than that, but Mitch Marner to the Flyers for Provorov and Konechny. And then I find a way to get Jacob Chikrin as my left side top pairing defenseman from Arizona in another deal. And that's going to be more asset driven and draft pick driven. Am I crazy?
I don't think you're crazy, right? Because Toronto has not proven to us otherwise to this point, right?
Yeah.
We're gonna head into this playoff run here for Toronto, and this, the whisper is gonna turn into screams and loud noise that Toronto can't get out of the first round again. So until proven otherwise, I think you're spot on with that. Where Toronto is going to have to make some changes if they can't get out of the first round of the playoffs again this season.
And they have 2 other guys that are face of the franchise in Matthews and Tavares.
And William Nylander, who can play both the center and the wing and is on a cheaper contract than Marner. You'd think that Marner really is the fall guy if they were looking to make a move. Like you mentioned, it's not going to be Matthews, Tavares, and Willie Nylander is kind of cost friendly to the Toronto Maple Leafs, believe it or not, with the contract that he's on. As for Chikrin, he meshes perfectly with the time frame that the Flyers are looking to turn things around, to my knowledge at least, and from what Chuck Fletcher's put out there. I don't think that, whether some fans agree or disagree, I don't think Chuck Fletcher, Dave Scott, and the organization wants to tear this down to the studs. I think, he mentioned in his press conference, he wants to add top-end talent because he does believe that the pieces are in place with Carter Hart. You have younger guys like Cam York on the blue line. Provorov, if they decide not to move him in a deal for a Mitch Marner or anything like that, he's still there. So they do have some talent. You need to supplement that with more talent. And a guy like Chikrin fits in beautifully with that window. He's cost controlled. I think he's making roughly 5.5 over the next 4 years in Arizona. And for him, you're looking at easily 2 firsts of value, if not into that 3 range. And that's just right off the bat, asking sticker price. And who knows what that turns into in a bidding war when you get teams like the Kings, like the Florida Panthers, like the New York Rangers, like the Boston Bruins, the usual, buyers at the deadline. If they happen to get interested, who knows what the sky is the limit for the price on Chikrin. But right off the bat, it's 2 first plus in value.
Wow. Yeah. Well, I mean, he's a good player, but you might as well offer sheet a guy. You're getting close there.
Listen, I am such a big fan of the offer sheets, and I wish they happened more.
Yeah, I do too. I talked about that in my other podcast today with Bill Meltzer. Just, it's so the pain on the back end if you really go at that high end with 4 first-round picks, because you may get a player, but the problem is you need those first-round picks going forward to supplement your team at the deadline and be able to make other deals to round out your roster, and that's part of the problem. How about Klingberg? There's been some speculation that he'd be a good fit here with the Flyers. We know that Ryan Ellis has only played, 4 or 5 games this year, and that's really been a huge issue for the Flyers, and Klingberg's out there. He's 29 years of age. He's not going to be staying in Dallas. That ship has pretty much sailed. He's going to look for a big raise, though, as well, end term. Is Klingberg a guy that, you would look to see go to a rental market with the hopes of that team extending him and maybe conditions on any exchange that's made there?
I think makes much more sense, like you mentioned, on the rental market. I know that Boston had a ton of interest in John Klingberg going back a couple weeks ago or so when his name first kind of burst onto the scene with the potential trade request and whatnot. The reason why things have cooled down with Klingberg is that, when Chychrun kind of came up on the market and he was a hot name, and then that, as the world turns, I guess, to put it in the best phrase, there's always new hot names on the market and the teams kind of shift attention. Klingberg has kind of flown under the radar for the past couple of weeks, but he still makes a ton of sense for teams that are going to lose out on Gerard and lose out on Chychrun. And if you're looking for a guy who can move the puck, but also be really, really steady on the back end, and that's kind of the cool thing about Klingberg is a lot of the stigma around puck moving defenders are they're not great in their own defensive zone. Klingberg has proven that to be incorrect, and he's been really solid in his defensive zone with his tenure in Dallas. So if you're a team like a Boston Bruin team or even the Philadelphia Flyers, I mean, you mentioned them, and we have an inkling that Rasmus Ristolainen is not going to be back with the club next year, especially for what he's looking on in the open market. Likely they're going to at least ask for around the same dollar amount, but personally, I'd rather Klingberg than Ristolainen. So if you're able to move Risto out to a rental team that potentially was interested in Klingberg and kind of achieve two birds with one stone, kill 2 birds with one stone there, then yeah, Klingberg makes a ton of sense for a team like Philadelphia too, who's looking to just add talent. And that's the key thing here for a lot of teams. And that's why, we say this every year that, the deadline's a lot of action, a lot of things going to happen. I think more so than ever now that you're going to see teams like the Flyers, like the Devils, like, the Detroit Red Wings, teams that are on the outside looking in, not only just selling assets, but potentially making moves that set them up for the next year or so. Because, embarking on a rebuild is a tough process for everybody in your organization. And we've seen that, and look at Edmonton, case in point, picking first overall year after year after year is not necessarily a path to success. So if you're a team that's on the outside looking in and this year isn't your year, it doesn't mean you don't add talent and you add assets, because you can supplement that with a good offseason and a good draft, and you're right back in the thick of things for a wild card spot.
Yeah, I look at Anaheim and I look at the Kings. Those two teams both had great runs in the mid 2010 decade. Kings won a couple of cups. Anaheim was always good, big, heavy hockey. Recoiled. Both of those teams are much better now by good drafting, and it wasn't number 1 overall. They get Zegras and Drysdale out there in Anaheim, and good players that the Kings did a good job drafting as well. I don't think you have to bottom out, because look at you're right. You look at Edmonton, 4 number 1 overall picks in 6 years, NRD. Yeah. And they're not going to make the playoffs, and they just bounced their coach, and they get the best player, most skilled hockey player I've ever seen put on skates in McDavid.
I've said countless times that while I will never argue anybody that says that Wayne Gretzky was one of the greatest hockey player of all time, I think McDavid is by far and away the most skilled hockey player of all time. Yeah. What Gretzky had, between the years with his sense of the game and the hockey IQ, obviously maybe that'll develop with McDavid and over time, but McDavid is vastly, vastly more skilled. And quite frankly, it's shocking that they haven't been able to figure it out there. But to that point, like you mentioned, Anaheim and LA, and I'm glad you kind of threw the point in there. They didn't tear it down to the studs. They didn't sell the house and, everything. So there is chances for a team like the Philadelphia Flyers to just draft well, get back to, adding depth into the back end on the blue line and acquiring that high level talent and turning things around a little bit more quick than some would think right now. And you look at Anaheim and LA as, a great case study in that.
Let me hit you on 3 players: Rasmus Ristolainen, Travis Konechny, and Travis Sanheim. Let's start with Ristolainen. They paid a pretty hefty price, including that first-round pick in last year's draft. Are they able to recoup a first-round pick if they move him?
With the way that the market tends to play itself, especially as we approach the deadline, absolutely. I think that easily you're going to get a team that loses out on a Sherratt or a Klingberg or a Chikrin. I think he's more in that Klingberg class of maybe that second tier of guys that teams will look to acquire after they miss out on the big fish. But when teams miss out on the big player, you tend to turn to what's left on the market and upbid that. So I don't see a world where Philadelphia isn't able to, at least, whether it's a conditional first or protected first, I should say, or a second and something, which is originally what we thought the price was for Ristolainen when he ended up going to Philadelphia. I think that they're going to get equal value. I don't think they're going to sell Ristolainen at a loss.
Well, what about the two Travises? Now, Sanheim has a year left, and it walks him right up to UFA status. But that's attractive for some teams because you get more than one kick at the can with him. And if you like him and he likes you, you extend him. Is there any conversation around Travis Sanheim?
Rather quiet around Travis Sanheim right now, and I think that a lot of that is due to the fact that Ristolainen, or at least quiet in national circles, and I think that's due in part to Ristolainen being the rental, and everybody kind of looks for a rental when they're buying at the deadline. But if you're Philly, and I'll ask you this because love watching the Flyers hockey. Been around for a couple Flyers games up in the press box. I'm sure we brushed shoulders a couple of times, but that being said, you're probably more in touch with the Flyers than I am, and if you're a guy, if you have Sanheim in the blue line and you're trying to add as much talent, is there a world where Sanheim kind of sticks with the Flyers and they carry him right to UFA if they're able to turn things around in an offseason? Perhaps, and that's why I think a lot of things have been quiet around Sanheim.
What about Konechny? Because there's some reports out there. I know Elliott reported that they told Konechny that his name was out there last year and they were listening, but they were going to come back with him. And this year it's been a little uneven for him again. Any chatter around him? He's got a contract that's not too exorbitant, and he's a player that was an all-star, scored 24 goals in back-to-back seasons. In the second one he did it was in 69 games. It was basically a 30-goal pace, but he's been uneven and way too inconsistent here in Philadelphia. Is there any chatter around his name, or is that more of an off-season move?
I think that's an off-season move, and what Elliott was alluding to, and a lot of Flyers fans obviously know this, Konechny's name was mentioned heavily in the Patrick Laine rumors of years past.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the Flyers organization got some cold feet there on moving him when push came to shove, when the chips were on the table for a Laine deal. And I like Elliott mentioned, they let the player know that his name was out there. They didn't end up doing it, but the pressure is on to kind of perform here, or else you're going to be somewhere else. I still think it's an off-season move, especially because it's an interesting move. Like you mentioned, he doesn't have a large contract, but he is under contract. And it's really about for him, a player like him, and I liken it, I think he's a better player than a guy like a Jake DeBrusk or whatnot, but I liken it to a similar situation where it's a very particular fit when you're acquiring a guy like that that's younger, but he's under contract for a while. You have to, when you bring a guy like him in, you have to make sure that he kind of works into your lineup and your vision for the organization, not only for this year, but years ahead. And I think that's why you see a lot of those moves tend to happen in the offseason where teams have a better chance of reevaluating, what they're going to look like in the future seasons.
Braun, Jones, all going to be shipped out.
Yeah,
makes no sense not to, right?
You would think that they'd have to be moved. I know, the 5th round offer from the Edmonton Oilers for Jones pretty low, and I can understand Chuck Fletcher passing on that, but teams always love goaltending depth come playoff time. Some team's going to step up. Might even be Edmonton. I know they have a lot of question marks on what they're going to do in net. I still don't see Edmonton acquiring the big fish and Marc-Andre Fleury. So they're just going to continue to circle the wagons until they can get a goaltender for a price they like. So potentially still in play there with Edmonton. But either way, goaltending depth is extremely important, especially in today's times, in today's climate. So there's no reason not to move a guy like him.
All right, NRD, last one for you, and I appreciate the time that you're giving us. This is great stuff. Let's
Absolutely.
talk about the Flyers coaching situation. Obviously, Mike Yeo was thrown into a very difficult spot. Game 2 of 5 games in 7 days against Colorado Avalanche that night when they played the night before, and took over for AV. And it's been, got him straightened out for a little bit in a 7-game point streak and then a 13-game winless skid again, and up and down a little bit, 2 wins, now 2 losses. When you look at the Flyers coaching situation, I think a lot of it depends on the direction they try and go and build the team. Is it young players and you're looking at a kind of a rebuild, retool, or is it pushing in a more veteran direction? Because there's a different coach for each one of those situations. A guy like John Tortorella doesn't make sense on a developing team like he does with a veteran team that's pushing to win. What are you hearing as far as names for potential coaches beyond this season, which is going to happen in the offseason, but who you hearing?
I mean, the obvious name is Tocchet, right?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of question marks on whether he'd kind of leave TV again to go coach. And to my knowledge, yeah, he's extremely interested in the Flyers job, but much like you mentioned, it really depends on the direction that the team takes in the offseason. I mean, I think Tocchet falls directly into the same category as John Tortorella. That if for whatever reason the Flyers decide to tear this down to the studs and rebuild, I don't know how welcoming a guy like Talk and Torts for that matter are going to be when they come behind a bench of a bunch of young guys. I do really like we know that Adam Foote was a potential name thrown around. We know that John Torchetti's now on the bench for the Flyers. I do really like that the Flyers, despite not kind of conducting a full-on coaching search mid-season, they're looking to or adding, and then looking to in the case of Foote, actually adding in the case of Torchetti, but adding names and coaching talent to behind the bench right now and in the system, because you really never know where that guy that's the right fit for your locker room can come from. So if you can get guys like that in the building now and have a chance to evaluate them, much like they're doing with Mike Yeo, as the bench boss right now, but get coaching talent into the building and evaluate them around the players and around the organization, I think it makes the search much, much easier when you hit the offseason and, hey, we have a bunch of candidates that we brought in midseason to see how they work out in-house. We don't really have to conduct extensive interview processes on them. We could kind of focus more on the big fishes like the Tortorellas, like the Tocchet's, if we decide to, add that talent and go for it again next year. So a lot of question marks still in play on what direction the team takes, like you mentioned, but I do really like the Flyers' willingness and eagerness to add coaching talent now with assistant and development roles, and then kind of see where the chips lie in the offseason.
Yeah, I think the other part that those guys like Torchetti and Foote bring is fresh eyes that haven't been here with no history to kind of evaluate, what the issues are without having, that preconceived notion of being here to look at this and really help the management team figure out, what fits, what doesn't, who's part of the solution and who's not. Not necessarily part of the problem, but who doesn't fit. It's a jigsaw puzzle. Do you look at any names like David Quinn or Jim Montgomery or any of those kind of guys?
Monty is the big name right now that, there's very, very faint whispers, but I think he's going to surprise a lot of people as the hottest name on the market come the offseason.
Yeah.
If the bigger, sexier names, if you will, is the Tortorellas and the Tocchet's, but I think the most realistic big name to end up getting one of these jobs is Jim Montgomery. I think, if the Flyers decide to go down that direction and target Montgomery, I think they're going to have a ton of competition right up I-95 with the New Jersey Devils. I think Montgomery is a great coach for what they're looking to do right now, and kind of Montgomery has experience behind the bench on a winning team, not a Stanley Cup winning team, but on teams that have went into the playoffs. And if the Devils were looking to come out of their rebuild, I think he's a coach that can kind of speak to the younger players while also coach the vets. So they're going to have competition if they go that route. But Montgomery stands out. For how many years now have we kicked around, Europeans white whale of Ricard Gronberg coming over to coach? I don't know if that's necessarily a fit for the Flyers and their style of hockey with the way he likes to play more in East-West. But then again, it really depends on the talent that they supplement the roster with and the fit there. And I think that's, I hate giving you a cop-out answer, but I think that's the safest answer, and it's the correct answer, whether it's not a quote piece and not a great quote, but it is the correct answer to say I think the Flyers are at a position now where they have to evaluate what they're really looking to do before they hire a coach, because there's tons of different coaches out there that changes the direction they go in. Like you said, Montgomery, Quinn, Gronberg, there's so many different guys out there for so many different fits.
Yeah, and you got to figure out what you want to be and then get the right coach to get the most out of what you want to be and what you have. NRD, this was awesome, and I really appreciate it. The podcast going well? Cold Stove Pod?
Cold Stove Pod is going awesome. We rip it every Wednesdays with my co-host Brett Merriman and I. Having a lot of fun with it. Glad I get to interact with everybody on Twitter. Glad I got to be here on your show today, Jason. I know it's long overdue. I appreciate all the support from you. And, for any Flyers fans listening out there is light at the end of the tunnel. I'll tell you that much, at least from NRD's belief. There is things will get better, and I'm excited to see what the Flyers do in the offseason. I really am.
The NHL is always more fun when the Flyers are good, because
I agree with that.
Nobody's ambivalent. They either hate them or they love them, even outside of Philadelphia. It's weird. It's a bizarre thing. A lot of Canadian fans are fans of the Flyers that like hated the Montreal team and love the Flyers because they went up there and beat them up. NRD at NHL Rumors Daily on Twitter. We appreciate it. Check out the Cold Stove Pod, and we appreciate the time, man. We'll have to do this again.
Absolutely, man. I appreciate it.
There he is. Thanks, man. Appreciate it. National Rumors Daily, NRD, joining us on Parx Sportsbook presents Stick to Hockey Live. Boy, there's a lot to digest there. A lot to digest. The market is beginning to set. And like you said, the Toffoli deal doesn't necessarily make it seem like it's a great market. Toffoli's a little different, though, because he's got 2 years beyond this under contract at 4.25. Or I think, 4.25, I think is his cap hit. And so that it's different, obviously, than a rental, a big difference. But he's a guy that was a part of a cup-winning team, had a lot of success, can still play, top 6. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. Guys like Tomas Hertl, apparently conversations have picked up in San Jose to extend there. He wants to stay. Apparently the Sharks want to keep him. Klingberg's another factor, right-handed D, 29-year-old with Dallas, and that's gone nowhere as far as extending there. Miro Heiskanen, obviously, the guy that they're going to, shape their defense around, rightfully so. JT Miller, another really good player, 2 years left on his deal, 28 years old, point per game player. But does Vancouver want to move him? They think they can maybe make a push to get into the postseason under Bruce Boudreau. So many variables here. It's going to be fascinating. None of which is to mention Claude Giroux, obviously. All the chatter is Colorado right now. We'll see if it remains Colorado or if that gets pushed over the goal line. But, I could see Carolina too. That would make a lot of sense. Him down in Carolina playing for Rod Brindamore. Bit of an innocuous market. And NRD's right. I don't think people hate the Carolina Hurricanes, except for maybe Montreal because of the Kotkaniemi thing. But overall, they're not one of those teams that garner a lot of hate. So the in-division tax isn't like it would be for Giroux if he was to go to the New York Rangers. Now, that would be weird. His name's been attached there. That would just be bizarre to see him in that ugly blue New York Ranger jersey. Now, we did see Lindros go from here to New York many years ago, but I don't know if I could swallow that one. I want Giroux to go chase a cup just like most people do. But, geez, I don't know if I want him to do it with the New York Rangers because I don't want the Rangers to win the cup. And I'm not a hater. I just don't want the Rangers to win it. I was brought up to hate the Rangers because we had cousins that were from New York and they were Islander and Ranger fans. And I couldn't stand them. Back all the way back to, guys like Ron Duguay and Barry Beck, Brian Leach, so many great players. And although we did like Mike Richter. We still like Mike Richter. All right, that's great stuff from National Rumors Daily, NRD. Thank him for joining us on this episode of Parx Sportsbook presents Stick to Hockey Live. We'll have another episode for you coming up on Thursday. Not sure who the guest is going to be just yet. Busy week for the Flyers. They'll be at it tomorrow night to take on the Pittsburgh Penguins, who are just surging once again. That game is on the road in Pittsburgh at PPG Paints Arena. And then they come home for a franchise high 8-game homestand. And it just doesn't get any easier. Pittsburgh, really good team on the road. Then you got Washington, Carolina, St. Louis, and Washington to round out the 4 games remaining after Pittsburgh at Wells Fargo Center to round out February. Then you start with Edmonton, Minnesota, Chicago, and Vegas for the month of March, all at home. Then you go to Florida and Carolina. It's a brutal schedule. Look, here's the deal. When you're not good, every opposition is brutal. They just got beat in a back-to-back situation by the Detroit Red Wings. Red Wings are improving, but geez, you shouldn't get beat back-to-back by that team 6-3 and then 4-2. Let me tell you about Parx. At Parx Sportsbook on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Make sure you follow their social channels. Make sure you download the app, most importantly. If you're using another service, I don't care what it is, just try Parx. Just get on there. Take advantage of the risk-free $500 bet. Just for signing up, deposit, no promo code required, and you'll get a $500 risk-free bet. So check it out. Give it a sample. I guarantee you'll like it. That's all I'm asking you to do. Download it, get a little sample, see if you like it, and you will. Bet on same-game parlays, player performances, first to score, exact score, over-unders on points in games. When it comes to hockey, hoops, college and pro, it's all there for you. All easy to use. And again, real simple. Just download it, put it on your phone, open up an account, deposit your first bet risk-free up to $500 with no promo code required. We love it. We use it. Harry will have some plays tomorrow on AGs when we do our Tuesday program at 1:15, I think, tomorrow. And we'll have plays for you on Thursday as well with Tone's Takes. And we'll get you set up and put that $500 risk-free bet to good use. So make sure you download the app, Parx Sportsbook, in the App Store. And again, follow them at Parx Sportsbook on the social media channels, at Parx Sportsbook on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. All the major ones. All right, that's going to put a wrap on this episode. Everybody, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. If you're an audio guy, make sure you subscribe to this podcast and leave us a rating and review as well. We got to get some rating and reviews in. We haven't gotten any new ones since we relaunched. So leave those rating and reviews as well on iTunes or Stitcher or Spotify, Google Play, whatever you listen on, and we would greatly appreciate it. And if you're looking to do a podcast, check out my buddies at Wildfire Podcasting. Jim does a great job over there. They got a great studio just outside Philadelphia in Clementon, New Jersey. If you're thinking about a career in sports broadcasting, or you just want to do a podcast with your buddies, you got something to say, you want to do it for your business, that's a great way to reach customers and become an expert in your field. Podcasting is the way to do it. And, hundreds of thousands of listeners are at your disposal. So go to Wildfire Sports or go wildfirepodcast.com or email Jim. Here's his email, jim@wfgnj.com. jim@wfgnj.com. Tell them I sent you, and your first show is free. Again, visit wildfirepodcast.com. They're great people over there. And I love working with them and partnering with them for many years now here on the Stick to Hockey podcast and Stick to Hockey Live. Everybody, have a great rest of your Monday. We'll talk to you Thursday with another brand new episode of Parx Sportsbook Presents.